So, thanks, Steve, and good afternoon to everyone. Michael set me some challenges today. Coming up here as the fourth speaker means I'm going to try and just slice and dice a little bit my comments so that I don't duplicate. I think the kindest and most complimentary introduction I've had has been to be a tinge of hydrocarbon. And what I'm going to do today is try and answer some questions in terms of the energy sector, our economies, moving on to a lower carbon footing. And I think there are some basic questions I need to get to in there. One is just to reflect on where we are, and we've already had some comments about where demand is, where supply is, and some of the opportunities. Where do we want to go from here? So what price are we willing to pay, whether that be social or economic? And how do we get there from here with the practical, common sense type of approach that Steve was advocating? So I'm going to address those questions, and because oil sands is such a central part of the company I work for, I'm going to do it from an oil sands perspective. Now, as the speakers have already mentioned, there is a lot of policy uncertainty following Copenhagen, and there's a lack of clarity in terms of the world we're operating in. I definitely like to see more cohesion, more clarity at the policy level, both nationally and internationally, and I'm sure that's coming. But an industry like ours doesn't take its signals solely from government. We need to understand and anticipate what societal expectations are and respond accordingly. So I'm going to talk about some of those puts and takes. Increasingly, companies are judged by stakeholders and shareholders. And a lot of that judgment is based on environmental and social performance. So one of the challenges being in the oil sands, and I'm sure you can recognize many of them, is the profile we as a company get. We've tried to be proactive. We are committed to a triple bottom line, which is something most people in the room here are familiar with. It does say that we put on an equal footing economic growth, social well-being, and protecting the environment in which our businesses operate in. We're one of the first major energy companies to adopt a climate change action plan in an attempt to better manage the greenhouse gas emissions we have. Now, and a key part of that was investing in energy efficiency, and Steve called it, the 101 of sustainability. Get your own energy consumption in order first. But let me just give you a few numbers, because one of the challenges for oil sands is everybody thinks they know what's going on. Very few comments I hear are actually fact-based. So compared to, let me just do some comparisons from 1990 to today. The oil sands industry has reduced the carbon it emits from a barrel of oil produced by just under 40%. Very few other industries or points of demand where we consume energy have improved it at that rate. In fact, Suncor has done it by 50% in that time. So it sort of lends to that, there are real technology opportunities that we can start to get to. As our industry grows, its overall carbon footprint is the subject of a lot of public scrutiny. And it's understandable. We understand that. Oil sands has a big environmental impact. There's legitimate concerns about our operations. And getting these facts and understanding are very important to us. Let me give you another one. Recent, completely independent of the oil industry studies, have shown that on a life cycle basis, oil sands crude, so taking it out of the ground, getting it through the transportation system to the point of consumption by a consumer, Oil sands is only marginally, that means 10 to 15% more carbon intensive than other sources of crude. In fact, on this continent, one of the most carbon-intensive crudes, higher than oil sands, is Californian heavy crude, a well-kept secret that most of us don't talk to very often. Now, don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean there's not plenty of room for improvement, and you'll hear me talk to that. And if there's one thing we've learned in our business over the last 4 decades, it's that the past is not a great indication of what's about to happen, and I'm going to take you through some of those things. So I'm not here to defend the status quo. If our industry is to make a lasting contribution, and I think it has to, as part of the energy mix, then we're going to need to continuously reduce and improve that environmental footprint. So that takes me to the second question. Where do we want to go? In an era of growing global demand for energy, we do need to recognize that the future is about increasing the energy choice. Exactly what Steve was saying. We need every energy source. It's not one or the other, and it's not about restricting it. We need to ensure solar, wind, biofuels are all part of that energy mix, and you'll hear me talk about how we, like a lot of other companies, have had a dual approach to that. So let me talk about some of those continuous improvements in performance. When it comes to existing energy sources, whether it's oil, gas, coal, or nuclear, technology clearly has a part to play there. Those sources in this parallel path is about how you drive research and development and alternatives to the technologies you're using. The reserves we talk about in the oil sands, let me context them for you. The oil sands are second only to Saudi Arabia in terms of reserves. So it's, as you heard spoken earlier, it's not about energy production for 5 years or 10 years. We're probably talking about one of the primary energy sources for the next century and beyond. More than 1/3 of Canada's total crude today comes from the oil sands. And in the North American context, Canada is already the most important energy supplier to the United States. And half of that crude from Canada originates in the oil sands. Another reason the oil sands is critical is that it represents such a huge resource. And let me just put that in a global context for you. About 80% of the global reserves left on the planet are controlled by national oil companies. And of that remaining 20%, half of them, so half of the freely traded reserves on the planet are in the Canadian oil sands. So they have a critical strategic role to play as we start to get this energy mix right for the planet going forward. So the responsible development, the generation of the intellectual capital, the royalties, the tax, the investment into those alternate technologies I talked about are a vital part of that mix. And that parallel approach is something we as an industry and company have tried to work on. So you'll hear us talk about big investments in renewable energy, big investments. We're the biggest ethanol and biofuels producer in Canada. You'll hear us talk about these dual and complementary approaches. But those kinds of investments don't make the same returns that the oil sands investments or conventional investments can make. And there was a famous saying by Gretzky about an observation he made. Success is about skating to where the puck is going to be, not where it's just been. That's why technology has such an important part to play.